The kind of goals that we'll be aspiring to in developing psycholinguistic theory is to ultimately account for what our cognitive state is, the state of our mind, the computations that are undergoing, the representations that we have at every moment of language understanding and language production. This implicates very broad and general questions like how we manage uncertainty about the interpretation of input that we've already gotten and about what possible input might be in the future, what determines the difficulty of integrating new input, say a word, into its context, and what influences how we package our thoughts into utterances. And many of the workhorses experimentally of psycholinguistic methods involve behavioral measures. Things like what choices do people make in various kinds of language producing and language comprehending situations, like what do we interpret an utterance to mean in the context in which we read or hear it, what words do we choose to convey a meaning. Also, an important part turns out to be how long do people take to make these choices. That actually turns out to carry a lot of information that can be used to develop theory. Some of these involve what are called quote-unquote offline measures, and by offline in this field, we mean things that don't happen in the moment. It's not on the web or off the web, it's in the moment or given an amount of time. And so this is things like rating sentences or giving the beginning of a sentence and having a participant complete it. And we also use online measures that is moment-by-moment real-time measures. Things like tracking people's eye movements as they read or listen, having people read words aloud, having people read under some kind of time pressure, and many other things. There are also going to be a lot of non-behavioral methods that we use for studying human language processing, notably neural methods, and we'll get to that later on in today's lecture. Before I go into specifics of any of the details of the methods, I want to sort of pump your intuitions about the kinds of time courses and moment-by-moment detail at which we might be interested in understanding how language understanding unfolds. So this is going to be a demonstration of the impressive incrementality of human language understanding, and to demonstrate this, I'm just going to give you a sentence word by word. And as you see it, you'll just note your cognitive state. Note what was going on in your mind. Just try to understand the sentence. Okay. If you're like most people, you found the sentence perfectly pedestrian, nothing special about it, until the very last word, which was very surprising and very weird, and you may not even believe at this point that this is a real sentence of English. This turns out to be actually a sentence of English, but it is weird and surprising and jarring and makes you perhaps not trust that it is a real sentence of English for reasons that I'm going to explain, and that are going to actually occupy a lot of theory development for us in the lectures to come. So this is the sentence, the woman brought the sandwich from the kitchen tripped. And the word tripped is jarring, surprising, and hard to integrate in the context. You might think that at this point that there's something wrong with the sentence, that it needs to be changed in some form, and we're interested in theory development of like why you might think that, but what I want to focus on now is explaining to you that actually this is a perfectly reasonable sentence of English in terms of the grammar of the language. Now, we don't have all the formal tools for describing the grammatical structure here, but I think that I can, even without those formal tools at this point, give you a basic understanding of this. So I'm going to get rid of that sentence for now, and I'm going to give you a different sentence. The woman who was given the sandwich from the kitchen tripped. And you probably think that this is a perfectly fine sentence. It's maybe a little bit weird. It's maybe unusual to use the word given in this way. Might be something you experience. But I think you recognize that there's nothing strange about what this sentence, the grammatical pieces are fine, the meaning is fine. Somebody gave a sandwich to the woman who's being talked about, and that sandwich came from the kitchen, and that woman tripped. That's what's going on. Now I'm going to take this same sentence and just change the way I present it on the screen a little bit to make something really clear. So here I have the woman who was given the sandwich from the kitchen tripped, and I've taken the words who was and I've sort of pulled them out of this part of the sentence right here, and instead I put them down here to emphasize something. There's a general rule in English, there's a grammatical rule that allows you to take words like this word sequence, who was, in a wide variety of contexts and just get rid of it. To give you a little bit more information about the structure of this sentence, who was given the sandwich from the kitchen is a phrase. And it's modifying the woman. As I told you informally before, it's telling you which woman we're talking about. It's telling you an attribute of that woman. So given the sandwich, who was given the sandwich from the kitchen, all is a single unit in this sentence. And it is playing a modifying role, modifying woman. The kind of unit that it is what's called a relative clause. Okay? And having the words who was at the beginning is a very common way to begin a relative clause. But there is a rule in English that allows me to get rid of the words who was when they begin a relative clause. And so I'm going to do that here and just create the alternative version of this sentence. The woman given the sandwich from the kitchen tripped. That just is exactly the same, but it doesn't have the words who was. And you probably also recognize that this is a fine sentence. Maybe it's a little bit unusual looking, but it means the same thing with or without the words who was. And I think at this point, most people, this is not something that you find to be impossible to accommodate. Now, let's take the first version at the bottom here with the words who was, and I'm going to do something else, which is I'm going to substitute out the word given for the word brought. The woman who was brought the sandwich from the kitchen tripped. And once again, you probably recognize that this is an okay sentence. The woman is getting brought the sandwich, so somebody is bringing the sandwich to the woman from the kitchen. So as before, who was brought the sandwich from the kitchen is a phrase, particularly a relative clause, that is telling you something about the woman. And it's that woman who tripped, is what the sentence says. Well, as before, when the words who was begin a relative clause, in these two cases, I should be able to delete them and still come up with an okay sentence. That is a general rule of English. The words who was at the beginning of a relative clause can be omitted. But when I do that, I come up with something that is weird. The woman brought the sandwich from the kitchen tripped. And what's interesting even more so is that what's weird about it is not this part where I've made the change. It's actually this part over here at the very end of the sentence. And there's an intuitive reason why that is, because up to this point, there's a perfectly reasonable way to interpret what's going on, and the meaning is completely different from this woman being the one who receives the sandwich interpretation. Instead, the woman is doing the bringing of the sandwich. The woman has the sandwich in the first place and is bringing the sandwich from the kitchen. But on that interpretation, it turns out for grammatical reasons that tripped just doesn't belong here. It just can't be accommodated. And so that creates a big surprise, and you probably experienced this in your mind, and makes the sentence very hard to understand. And that is an empirical instance of a much more widespread phenomenon about the way that language understanding works and unfolds in real time. But what I really want to draw your attention to is the incrementality of this. That moment by moment you actually had, it's very natural to have sort of a cognitive state understanding. You're actually very aggressively interpreting the input that you have moment by moment, word by word, and you're not waiting until the very end of the sentence. So human language understanding is not a batch processor that takes in a whole sentence at a time, does something to the whole sentence, and then goes on. It's actually much more incremental than that. I've also demonstrated the fact that structure is crucially involved. The fact that this relative clause is here after the woman and may or may not be easy to recognize plays a crucial role in modulating your understanding of the sentence and how that understanding unfolds. And of course, the empirical, subjectively experienceable manifestation of difficulty is that, in this case, that you're surprised, but you'll see that we're able to get at it even more than that. So you can ask the question now, so why does removing the words who was create so much difficulty in the brought version and do not create so much difficulty in the given version? And I just want to give you a basic intuition for this. It has something to do with the fact that the verb bring has the same form in two different uses. In the simple past tense, like I brought the sandwich, and the past participle, I was brought the sandwich. Those are two very different interpretations. I'm either the bringer or the recipient of the sandwich. But regardless of which version I'm using, the form of the word is the same. Give is different. In the simple past form, give is gave. But in the past participle, it's the form given. And so the woman given the sandwich from the kitchen is not easily interpretable as the woman's doing the giving. In the brought case, it is easy to interpret the woman as doing the bringing. And we will have formal explanations for this. It's a very well-studied example in psycholinguistics. I want to emphasize, though, that in addition to these sort of, you can see that bring and give are very similar to each other. Not only are they similar meaning-wise, but the parts of speech from the first examples to the second examples are one and the same. Part of speech versus part of speech identical. But meaning can actually help us avoid this too, so I can create another part of speech by part of speech, pretty much identical example. The evidence examined by the lawyer from the firm. Here, examined is like bring. It examined the evidence. For example, the witness examined, the witness was examined. Examined can be used in both the simple past and the passive participle version. But in this example, you probably don't find unreliable, was unreliable to be hard. And the reason has to do probably with the semantics, is it is very natural for us to use a structure where the lawyer is doing the examining of the evidence. That's a very natural meaning to convey. Whereas it's a little unusual to have this kind of format to describe the woman getting brought the sandwich. So that probably plays a role too. So that is hopefully something that will help pump your intuitions, and we're going to get back to this example later on. But I want to now back up and ask, so I demonstrated, hopefully, the incrementality of language processing. And now how do we get at that in a more quantitative, measurable, experimental, replicable way? There are well-developed experimental techniques drawing on methods from psychology and insights from linguistics that allow us to develop methods for looking at this. This includes looking at where people look when they have a scene before them and they're listening, how long people take to read each word of a text, using any of a number of methods, and also neural recordings of brain activity. All of these are potentially deployable. They can be electrophysiological, they can also be magnetoencephalographic, they might involve MRI, they might involve electrocorticography, direct recordings from the brain. All of these are potentially useful. So we have a bunch of behavioral methods at the top and a bunch of neural methods at the bottom. And I'm going to try to give decent coverage to a wide variety of these today. Okay, the first thing I want to do is I'm going to just give you an example of the exquisite sensitivity of how your eye movements are sensitive when you're a listener, when you're listening to somebody talk, and what's being talked about relates to the visual environment. For example, if you're being asked to carry out an action on the scene in front of you, you're extraordinarily sensitive, and the eye-mind linkage is very tight, and it means that the eyes actually provide, because where you're looking is measurable, it's actually quite a rich source of insight into what's going on in real-time language processing. So this video is courtesy of Mike Tannenhouse, who is the pioneer of the visual world paradigm. This is over 2 decades old, this example. And so it's pretty low tech, but what's going on is that the participant has a head-mounted eye tracker. So they have an eye tracker. I'll show you a picture of it a little later. And there's a camera which is pointing toward their eyes, shining infrared light with a monitor, and that allows the researcher to monitor where the participant is looking, which is illustrated by this big white crosshair. That's showing where is the recipient looking at this point. And then there's another camera on this eye tracker, which is looking forward at the participant's visual scene, what the participant can see. And so you see that, and then you can put those two things together after the fact. And the participant, the experimental participant, is being given this grid of cards, and they're being asked to do something. And so just to illustrate this a little bit, there are these 2 cards on the bottom here, and here are the 5 of hearts. This is the king of spades, and here we have the 10 of clubs. This is the 8 of clubs, and the 3 of diamonds is here. Okay, and so I just want you to first listen to what you hear and see, and just note it, and then I'll go into it in greater detail. Here we go.
Now put the 5 of hearts that is below the 8 of clubs above the 3 of diamonds.
Great, and I'm going to do that one more time for you, just so you get it one more time. And you'll notice, just try to pay close attention to who's looking at what when, and exactly what's being said at that time.
Now put the 5 of hearts that is below the 8 of clubs above the 3 of diamonds.
So just intuitively, just to go back to that initial state, you'll notice that the participant looked back and forth between the 2 different 5s of clubs. They also fives of hearts. They also looked at the 8 and the 10 of clubs. And then at the very end, they didn't actually need to look at the 3 of diamonds up here. Once they decided which 5 of hearts to grab, they just did it immediately. Okay, so one more time.
Now put the 5 of hearts that is below the 8 of clubs above the 3 of diamonds.